Name's Kevin, and this is the Bible Artist Podcast. I'm joined by my friend Victor, and we will be discussing Amazon's House of David series. Specifically, we'll be getting into episode 5, although we have covered the previous 4 episodes, and we will also be getting into the future episodes in the following weeks. So thank you for joining us. We will be kind of dissecting some of the different storylines, discussing our own personal reactions to things. Maybe we might do some comparison between kind of what the House of David does and what we're told in Scripture. We'll be incorporating all kinds of different things like this. Would also love to interact with you if you're here. Please leave your thoughts, questions, your own feedback on the show in the comments, and I'll try to be keeping my eyes on that and responding to you as we're moving along. And also, if you haven't checked out my website, The Bible Artist, I've got all kinds of content related to both the House of David as well as The Chosen. So I do very in-depth recaps and reviews of the show, kind of my impressions, as well as kind of deeper analysis of some of the themes that are involved in these shows. I do character studies, I do Bible studies, lots of different resources that you can use not only to enjoy these shows on a deeper level and kind of engage with the scripture that's involved with them, but also if you are in a church context and maybe you're watching this show with a small group, they can be useful for doing that. I eventually would like to produce small group guides for House of David. I haven't been able to keep up with that yet, but probably later on in the spring or summer, I'll be hoping to produce some of those. But anyway, we'll be getting into House of David, episode 5. I guess before we get into the weeds here, Victor, do you want to share just kind of big picture thoughts on episode 5?
I thought this was just a really good middle of the season kind of letting us catch our breath as we get ready to get the last half of the season. Um, I just I just had like a moment while I was watching this of like, oh wow, we're in episode 5 of this show that we just found out was even going to exist, not too long ago, and here it is, halfway through, and it's a really good show. It's just kind of a neat time to be living in right now.
Yeah, definitely. When I started the Bible Artist, over 5 years ago now, I think, who would have imagined that we would be, here in this highly produced, high production value show on the story of David. And then, just a couple weeks from now, we're going to be watching season 5 of The Chosen, and we're going to have the Promised Land later on in the year, and also The Chosen Adventures. Yeah, it's just such a wonderful time to be a fan of Bible-based shows and storytelling. And episode 5, I agree with you. I thought it was a great hit for the show. It was actually, for me, it was like one of my favorite episodes, I think, of the show so far, because I feel like they really kind of hit their stride with David's character. Like up until now, one of my complaints has been like, with David, he sometimes kind of feels a little too simplistic, a little too perfect. But like episode 5, I feel like they finally gave him some real stuff to like deal with, some struggles, also some more like complexity where he's feeling like pulled in different directions and interesting ways. And we got a lot of the drama with the House of Saul, which has always been like my favorite aspect of the show thus far, is just kind of seeing some of the machinations in Saul's house, and seeing how the different characters are interacting with each other and stuff like that. So definitely a great episode. And this one isn't based as like directly on actual kind of biblical events, although it is kind of prepping us for a biblical event. So just as a little context there. So in the Bible, as far as like, so this episode, spoilers, this episode is about kind of marriage negotiations. So initially it looks like Saul is going to be negotiating with the elder of Judah, Adriel. He's going to be trying to negotiate to offer his daughter Michal in marriage to one of Adriel's sons. And Michal is kind of trying to figure out which son, and Saul and Adriel are kind of dealing with kind of the details of the deal that they're going to make. But then as things move along, eventually it looks like Saul is going to be marrying off Mirab, his other daughter, to Jordan, one of Adriel's youngest sons, instead of marrying off Michal, because he realizes, oh, Mirab actually likes one of Adriel's sons, and it's a nice moment for Saul. But then the final turn is that actually things completely fall apart because Saul goes raving mad because of the evil spirit that's tormenting him, and so all the marriage negotiations are off, which is crushing for Mirab, who actually seems to have been interested and genuinely kind of, I don't know if you would say in love, but at least like infatuated with Jordan, Adriel's son, and yeah, the house of Judah kind of storms off as Saul is just going crazy. And so, yeah, none of those events are specifically recorded in the Bible, but we do have stuff in the Bible about who Michal and Mirab eventually get married to. So obviously, Michal, eventually she gets married to David. But before David and Michal get married, actually the first daughter of Saul that gets offered to David is Mirab. So when Saul is first trying to kind of marry off one of his daughters to David to try to kind of secure, kind of bring him into the fold so that he's not like this independent force that Saul has to worry about. His first idea is to marry off Mirab to him. And then something goes south. We aren't really told like why Saul reneges on that, but then we are told that instead of marrying Mirab off to David, he gives her to Adriel. And so at first, as I was watching this episode, my assumption was, oh, like maybe they're kind of, sometimes when you do an adaptation, sometimes combine characters together, or sometimes you separate characters apart and create like two characters to fulfill different roles. And so I thought like, oh, okay, in scripture it says that Mirab got married off to Adriel, but maybe they're kind of just tweaking it a little bit and having it be that she's going to get married off to one of Adriel's sons, to Jordan or whatever, because that's how it looks like it's going as the episode moves along. But then everything falls apart, and so you could either conclude, one, that they're kind of completely going away from what Scripture says, and none of the marriages are going to work out or whatever, or potentially this is setting up a marriage between Adriel, the older guy, and Mirab, which would feel very creepy. But he has this moment in this episode where he's like kind of hitting on Michal and being like, if my wife died, I would be trying to marry you myself. And it kind of like gives me a little bit of like creepy vibes. But given that he had that interaction with Michal, could totally see, now that he's kind of been insulted by Saul, maybe his wife does die, or maybe he decides to take two wives, and they use this as a way to kind of set up the idea of taking multiple wives, and maybe they'll have him like demand Mirab not for one of his sons but for himself, which would create all kinds of drama between Mirab and him, and then the son that she's actually in love with. So
I think they are 100% setting that up. I mean, it's like the third or fourth time we've had Mirab just kind of roll her eyes or kind of grimace in disgust at something Adriel has said to her that she clearly understands as some sort of kind of a lecherous kind of gaze toward her. So I think that's 100%. They're going to let us, the audience, kind of think, oh well, maybe she's not going to have to go through with that, and then they're going to hit us with it at the worst possible time.
Yep. Yeah, so I love how they're doing that. They're kind of creating this this backstory, which is going to give us kind of a greater appreciation for kind of the difficult position that women were in at this time, especially kind of daughters of kings who would get married off as political tools to cement alliances and stuff like that, and how that could even end up with a young woman getting married off to some old man who has a son the same age as her. So yeah, that it's going to be very icky when that happens, but
that was par for the course, though. I mean, it was always older men marrying, barely past puberty girls who were, officially or technically women at that point, and were able to bear children. So that was it was all older men and younger women then.
Yeah, because back at the time, the maternal mortality rate was so high that even if you maybe had a wife as a younger man, it was very likely that she would die off in one of the different pregnancies that she would have, and so the likelihood that you would need to remarry potentially multiple times throughout your life was pretty high, and so yeah, definitely you would definitely have older men that would be marrying younger women, like that kind of situation. So yeah, I love how the show is kind of introducing us to some of these different dynamics, which some Christians, you may hear about these kinds of things in like a sermon from your pastor or whatever, but it's very different to actually like see these things illustrated before your eyes, to see kind of the use of marriage as a political tool, to see the difficult situation that women are put in, yeah, to see kind of the way that these older men, yeah, just the way that they treat women and stuff like that. So I found that all kind of interesting, and I like where the show is going. I mean, I don't like it, but I
Right.
like how they're using it. So
Well, kind of the only real issue I had, not issue, but the only negative I would say about this
yeah.
episode is this particular part of the storyline. It felt really like all the characters kind of had way too modern of a sensibility about it.
Mm,
Like, the people writing the show know what our mindset is today, and
yep.
that we'd find all of this creepy. But
Yep.
that wasn't how they thought. I mean, maybe they did,
Mm,
but they also at the same time knew that this is the way the world works.
mm,
This is the economy of being a human in
mm,
ancient times. Is that if you're a woman or a daughter, you are going to be married off to
yep.
somebody as
Yep.
part of, just part of life. You know,
Yep.
and just there's a little bit too much of like this. They're aware of it being creepy or that kind of thing, which I understand, but it felt just a hair too modern
Mm,
of representation for me.
mm. I was okay with it, but I could see how, yeah, it definitely, they aren't going for kind of a completely historically accurate perspective for a lot of the different characters. Yeah, like you said, a lot of them, if they were put in this situation, they would just kind of take this as like, yep, of course, this is what happened to my cousin, and this is what happened to my mom, and this is probably what's going to happen to me. Marrying for love just wasn't in the cards, especially if you were some sort of figure of royalty or nobility within a house like Israel. So
Yeah, my
I definitely get
grandparents
where
were an
you're.
arranged marriage.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's not that distant for a lot of us, and so. Um, but I get what the show is doing as far
Mhm.
as like part of adaptation. It's not just taking a story from one medium and moving it into another medium, but it's also kind of taking some of the story expectations that we have. So like when we come to a story that involves like romance, we have certain expectations for how like a romance story is going to move along. And if you want to do it like completely historically, you could, but it's going to feel so foreign to a lot of us that it's going to be hard for most viewers to connect with it and even just kind of to understand it. And so, like, what a lot of adaptations do is they don't completely jettison the dynamics of the past, but they kind of mix them a little bit with some modern sensibilities, so that we have touch points where we're like, okay, I can see this, like I can kind of grasp what's going on here, but you're also learning a little bit of kind of what things were like back then. So it wasn't too much for me, but I definitely can see how
What Like
for
wasn't
other.
that bad? I would say that was just my only of all
Yeah,
the
yeah,
things on there. That was my only negative for this one. Was that
yeah. No, that
it
makes sense.
just a touch? So
Yeah, and probably particularly for Saul, I think like that he kind of has this self-awareness to be like, oh, I want to marry my daughter off for love, and not just use her as a political tool or whatever. Yeah, that he is able to come to that realization. I mean, it's nice that he has it. It's a little redeeming character moment for him. But it seems pretty unlikely that he would have kind of had that degree of insight. Even if he's helped along by David in that kind of realization. Um, yeah, but I guess kind of speaking more broadly of kind of Saul's storyline and his interactions with Adriel. So yeah, throughout the episode, Saul and Adriel Adriel. I'm probably gonna keep switching back and forth. Sorry about that. But so the story starts out. Adriel is kind of hinting that he would like something from the house of Saul, as Abner is coming to him and wanting information on who Samuel met with when he was going around the area of Judea, because Abner is suspicious that maybe Samuel was anointing someone from the clan of Judah, which he actually did, and Adriel kind of uses that as leverage to get this kind of marriage alliance going. And then, as things move along, so Saul, he, announces, and then him and Adriel start kind of going back and forth on some of the terms of what would happen kind of to get the marriage happen, or to get the marriage going. Because, back in those days in ancient Israel, marriage isn't primarily about, two people vowing their love for each other, but it's a union of those two houses. And so, there were a lot of kind of financial agreements that were involved with that, like dowries or kind of political arrangements, especially when you have kind of different houses, like Saul's house and the house of Judah, represented by Adriel. So we see them kind of going back and forth on some of those things. And as all that's happening, we then, see Saul start to get plagued again by the evil spirit that's been tormenting him, which takes on the face of Agag, the king of the Amalekites, who was the one that Saul was supposed to kill, but didn't. And he starts kind of whispering to him about how the Lion of Judah is going to be coming and trying to take his throne. Yeah, Victor, I'm curious, what did you think about the kind of the Agag bit of this?
I really like that part of it. I thought that was a great way to represent his madness, in
Yep.
a TV format. It was,
Yep.
it fit. That is the symbol of his going crazy, was right around that time. So that would be something that would have cemented in his mind as, where this madness emanates from
Mm-hmm.
within him.
Yeah, no, I really liked the choice of Agag. Like you said, it's kind of the start of his madness. It also represents kind of why he was stricken with the madness, because his major disobedience that he's being punished for is that he didn't put Agag to death, as well as kind of he took the spoil from the Amalekites, and also as kind of a part of that, one of the reasons that he didn't put Agag to death is because he wanted to show off his own power and strength before his people, before Adriel and kind of the other nobles. And so this is kind of him almost kind of like getting what he was asking for. Like he wanted to keep Agag around, and so Agag is sticking around with them. But instead of being helpful and kind of boosting him, Agag is, whispering these words of suspicion and causing Saul to kind of try to hold on even more tightly onto his power, which is kind of his besetting sin, or his tragic flaws, that he wants to hold on to that power and cling on to it instead of letting it go when he's challenged for it. So I thought that was just a really clever choice, having him be kind of that voice of the paranoia for Saul. Yeah. And
I
also,
like that they did that instead of just being a disembodied voice
yeah,
afflicting him.
yeah, it definitely would have felt harder to connect with if it was disembodied. And we're used to, from shows, like the idea that you can see a character, and we understand when only one character is able to see that character. That's just something that we get so much in different movies and shows and stuff like that, that it's just kind of second nature for us now. So yeah, I thought that was really well done. And then kind of sliding over into Saul and Ahinoam as well. I love how that intersected with Saul's relationship with Ahinoam. So kind of a few episodes ago, we got this scene where Saul had this moment with Ahinoam where he was kind of longing for their more innocent youth together, when he didn't have all these responsibilities, and when they were just married and that was enough for him. And as I've been kind of thinking about her character, oh, by the way, kind of side note, If you haven't checked out my interview with the actress who plays Ahinoam, uh, Ayelet Zur, yeah, definitely check that out. It's on the channel. It was a really interesting interview. She had a lot of insights into the character. We discussed episode 5 a little bit, so definitely check that out. But anyway, back to the actual storyline. Um, so yeah, Saul, he's kind of nostalgic for their simple youth together, and so he makes this necklace for her in, I don't know, episode 2 or episode, yeah, I think it's episode 2 maybe, um, which is kind of supposed to represent their youth because it's got stones that they used to pick up together. And then in this episode, after kind of Agag has been hounding Saul and kind of sowing these whispers of suspicion and fear, there's this point where Saul has a breakdown. He attacks Adriel, vocally at least, and is kind of screaming and raving and calling off the marriage and all that stuff. And then when Ahinoam kind of tries to step in and tell him like, "Hey, let's get you out of here," Saul like grabs her by the neck, like choking her, and then when he pulls away, the necklace rips. And so I thought that was really interesting as kind of a symbol of kind of their innocence kind of getting torn apart. Um, and so and kind of the flip side of that is that while kind of Saul looks to Ahinoam as this symbol of their kind of this innocent past, in the present, throughout the episode, she is kind of egging Saul on to kind of cling on to his power, to yeah, to be trying to kind of do these deals with Adriel and stuff like that. And so even though he looks to her as this symbol of his innocence, she is herself throughout this episode more of kind of a symbol of his desire for power, his desire to hold on. So I think it's really interesting how we see kind of two dimensions to her character, kind of the what he sees, remembering the past, and then like who she is in the present, and how they kind of collide, and kind of that innocent past gets destroyed during this episode. I don't know if you had any kind of thoughts on Noam.
Yeah, just I love how we see that how both of them do love each other.
Yeah.
Clearly, you know, loved each other before any of this kingdom came into their lives. But at this point, they both seem to love the power at least equally, if not more, than the
Mhm.
love for each other, and that's kind of taking them down these other paths that is going to basically destroy their family at some point.
Yep. Yeah, I liked a point that Ayelet made during our interview, which is basically I kind of the way that I framed it as kind of these being like two kind of opposing things, like her desire for power and her love for her family. But what she pointed out is the reason that she wants that power is because she sees it as necessary to protect her family, keep them safe, hold things together the way that she thinks they should be, which is often what happens. Like we go for power because we think that we need it to serve the people that we love. But oftentimes, like you said, we start to love that power almost as much as, if not more, than the people that we originally were trying to get it to protect. And so, yeah, there's kind of this paradox where, in our pursuit of power to help the people that we love, we oftentimes destroy the relationships that we were trying to protect to begin with, which is a really tragic thing. And I
Mm-hmm.
definitely feel like that moment when her necklace is torn, and we'll talk a little bit more about Mirab. Mirab is also on the floor weeping. Yeah, I found that moment to be really one of the more kind of emotionally moving scenes of the show so far. Yeah, just seeing kind of this tragedy of these characters being kind of broken apart by the very person who, in theory, he's trying to do all this to hold his house together, but he's
Mm-hmm.
actually just making things worse by clinging on. Yeah.
I almost wish that we'd have had like a season before this, House of Saul,
Mm,
because I think it would have been even more impactful and powerful to see, Saul get anointed and
Mm,
you know, the when he's like when he is the David
hmm.
and he's on rising up and the families, you know,
Mm,
doing what they're supposed to do. So that way, when we get to this, the tragedy is just that much more
mm.
painful to experience as a viewer.
I mean, who knows? Maybe if House of David has enough success, they could go back and do a like a House of Saul prequel. They could probably recast because when like Saul is first kind of brought on as king, he's probably a couple decades younger.
It's 40
Yeah.
years younger
Oh,
because
40 years younger. So you could definitely
he
recast.
reigned for 40 years, so
Yeah, yeah,
that had to have been a while back. So
yeah. Yeah, that would be interesting. And actually, I feel like that show would work almost better as a prequel because, like, I think it'll be more interesting to see, having now seen kind of where the characters are going to end up,
mm-hmm.
to kind of see like, oh, there's actually parallels between Saul and David. Like he kind of started out a little bit like David, and he had a little bit of that optimism, but where were they different to start off, and how do we kind of make sense of that? But yeah, I would love it if they
You could probably do like a
eventually.
like a movie, maybe just like a
That's
House of
true. They could
Saul
just do a movie.
spinoff movie. Be
Yeah,
kind of cool.
yeah. I mean, I think there's probably enough material for them to do like an entire show with that. Like, you've got the ark getting captured by the Philistines, and you could do some more stuff with Samuel, and yeah, and then Saul's kind of rise to power. The really powerful story of Jonathan and his armor bearer climbing the cliff to take on the Philistines. There's some really good moments during that whole kind of time period. So yeah, I would love it if they.
It's gonna be curious to see how, you know, the Wonder Project and 5 and 2 Studios, the Chosen
Mm,
and House of David teams divvy up the Bible so that they're not,
mm,
you know, announcing projects. Like, well, I want to do a Joseph. I know they're already doing Joseph, but
yeah,
you know, it's like who gets to do you know, Samson?
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, that seems more like a House of David kind of
That's
you
true.
know, more the
Yeah,
epic type stuff, judges and wars and battles and stuff. That's kind of more in their wheelhouse, it seems.
yeah, yeah. I mean, in part, I wonder if the Chosen kind of announcing this slate of shows and stuff, which several of them are going to be, a few years down the pike. They're kind of trying to kind of stake their claim to certain stories, so that
Mm,
some of the other up and coming biblical adapters are not like swooping in and taking some of the stories that they're wanting to do. Because yeah, there's definitely going to be um, this market for this kind of content. And so, yeah, as you get House of David turning out to be a success, I'm sure that Wonder Studios or Wonder Project is going to get interest from other studios, or probably from Amazon wanting to do more stuff. And so,
mm-hmm.
yeah, it'll be interesting to see. It probably works out well for Amazon that kind of both of these, even though they're Amazon isn't like exercising like a ton of control, they'll probably kind of be able to get them to play nice with each other. And John Irwin and Dallas, they seem to be friends, and they are consulting with each other and stuff like that. So I don't
Mm-hmm.
think they'll probably have too much difficulty like divvying things up between the two of them. But I could see, potentially if you have, maybe Netflix bring someone on to try to do their own series or something like that. Eventually, you'll probably get some competing takes on similar characters or events, which I'm for. Like, I think you could potentially do some of these stories from different angles and still have it be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, even our own work. Like, if anyone still wants to fund us to do David and the Outlaws, it's very different from House of David, similar in certain ways, but I definitely think kind of our take of not focusing on David but on his men is unique, and would also make for kind of a interesting alternative window into these stories. Yeah, so I think you can have kind of different takes on the same material, but
Mm-hmm.
it'll probably be harder for like a studio to want to like go back after the same material. I mean, I already with David. there's an animated David movie that's been in production for a couple of years now with Angel, and so it'll be interesting to see how House of David, maybe that'll kind of increase interest for that, or maybe with some people that might kind of undercut their desire for, like, because if you can get like a more kind of mature version, you're probably not going to get as many like like young males that are going to want to see the animated one, but maybe for families with kids and stuff, it's a like a kind of alternate way to approach that stuff, because House of David's definitely not something that you're probably going to watch with your younger kids or whatever.
Well, it would be nice to live in a world where we get to argue about which adaptation's better.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
enough of them to actually have differing opinions.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really good thing with adaptations. The nice thing about adapting the Bible is that there's no one that owns it's public domain or whatever. I guess only God, in some sense, owns the rights to the stories, and so the good thing about that is that some people worry, like, say with the Chosen, what if people kind of get the face of Jonathan Rumi as kind of their vision of Jesus, and what if they kind of over identify Jonathan Rumi's take with Jesus, and it starts to kind of overtake what the Bible says, which I think is like a real danger. But the kind of the antidote to that, I think, is actually to have multiple kind of quality adaptations of the gospel stories, so that as people are reading and they come to a description of Jesus in the Gospels, Jonathan Rumi isn't the only kind of potential kind of picture of that they get. They can think of like multiple different pictures of Jesus, and then be like, okay, and then look at the actual biblical text, and they are able to kind of see those as kind of potential like helpful insights, but not like kind of over identify it because it's the only one that they've got. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the dangers before kind of this wave of biblical adaptation is that a lot of people, with Jesus, for example, they only have kind of like one of the really like traditional pictures of Jesus as this, studly looking bearded guy. That's what's going on in their head whenever they think of Jesus. So I think it's like good to have that kind of initial vision challenged by having kind of multiple options that you're exploring. We've been roaming afield a little bit from, which is okay. But do you have any other kind of thoughts on Ahinoam and her story before we continue on to other characters?
No, we're good.
Yeah, I guess one other thought that just occurred to me. Yeah, I do like that they have her. So after kind of her necklace breaks, we then kind of see her kind of breaking her relationship with Saul in a more kind of significant way by taking his signet ring and then kind of overriding the laws to allow her medium or spiritist to perform sorcery on Saul. So like we see that there is kind of that breach that's kind of widening between them. So yeah, I just thought that was a interesting consequence that we got to already see from the events of this episode. Okay, now David and Michal, that's a little bit more of kind of the meat of this episode, their relationship drama. So yeah, kind of following out of last episode, we saw them meet as David is playing music in the house of Saul. Michal loves his music. They kind of bond as she's deciding to teach him how to read, and they're bonding over kind of the love of the scripture and stuff like that. And then this episode we have Ahinoam kind of step in and try to clamp down and say, you can't be talking to each other anymore. This is, he's beneath you. She's saying that to Michal, and she's forbidding David from seeing her again. Yeah, I don't know. What'd you think about the David and Michal romance?
Going into it, this was the thing I was not worried about, but it was like you know that this was going to be a thing they would have to invent, and
Yep.
it was going to be the most TV-ish. But I thought they pulled it off pretty good. At the acting in this particular set of sequences was very strong, and I believe the chemistry between the two of them. So that's kind of sells a lot of, or smooths out a lot of the rough edges that it might have had.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was more skeptical episode 4, but episode 5 really sold me a lot more on their chemistry, and I like how they're mapping kind of the struggle that they're having. It's kind of a struggle between like duty, kind of social duty, versus kind of greater kind of divine purpose and sense of identity. So Michal, she feels kind of torn between her duty to be this kind of proper princess who is kind of submissive to her father and does whatever he says. And if he says that you need to get married off to one of these princes, then that's what she's got to do. That compared to kind of her sense that, yeah, maybe her sense of love for David, which also seems to be tied into like she senses that there's something more in him, and maybe that's kind of part of her purpose. And then David, on the flip side, he has this. On the one hand, people keep telling him, "Get back to the party and keep playing your music." She tells him that. His brother Eliab tells him that. Someone else might tell him. I think Ahinoam tells him that at one point. So everybody's kind of telling him, like, keep doing your duty, like the stuff that you're here to do. But he has this kind of greater sense of purpose. He knows that he's been anointed. That's now part of his identity. And he has been called to eventually be the king of Israel. And he's kind of seeing like, oh, actually, since I have that kind of sense of greater purpose, that gives me some insight into how to navigate this. Because maybe if my purpose is to be king, and I have this attraction to Michal, the daughter of the king, then maybe if we get married, our houses can unite and we can avoid kind of any sort of bloodshed. So I thought that was like an
Mm-hmm.
interesting dynamic they explored between the two of them. And yeah, just like a good theme. It's like a classic, classic kind of fantasy theme, like, struggling with the sense of identity and purpose and duty. Yeah, I don't know if you had any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, kind of going back to what you were saying earlier about this was the first time David has really kind of popped as a character. And it's because, like, until now, he's been almost entirely reactive to things that are
Yeah,
happening to him. And in
yeah.
this episode is the first time he's making decisions for himself that,
Mhm.
could be good and bad, but at least he's doing things that are going to affect him and kind of lead him on his own path
Yeah.
away from what everyone else has for him. So that's kind of, it just finally gives him something to do.
Yeah, he's not just like saying yes to what other people are asking him to do, but he's doing his own thing that some people are not wanting him to do, and that
Mm-hmm.
helps him kind of define himself as a character in a way that's like more interesting and easier to stick on to. Tied to that, like I thought, yeah, some of the dynamics with him and Eliab and Joab, especially, like I'm really interested in what they're setting up there. So yeah, as kind of David is kind of during the whole scene where Michal is deciding which suitor to marry off to, and then she's sad and she leaves, and David goes follows her, and then Eliab comes and he's like, stop following her, like this isn't what you're here to do, you're here to play music. He's very, he's scared, because his sense of duty is that he's a brother, he's trying to protect his father's house, he's trying to even protect David, and so he can't let his brother kind of chase after this whim of love or whatever, which is makes a lot of sense. I totally get where Eliab is coming from. um, so they have that interaction, but then also later on, after kind of Michal is free to freed from the need to get married to one of Adriel's sons, she has a nice moment with David, but then Joab ends up finding David, and Joab, we get to see later on in the book of Samuel, Joab is going to be like a very formidable character who does some very shady things. He's gonna develop actually a lot of loyalty to David eventually, but he's going to do some very shady things kind of out of that loyalty to David. And we get to see a little bit of that kind of that fierceness and that kind of willingness to do some questionable things in this episode when he like almost pushes David off of this cliff that the fortress of Gibeah is overlooking, and threatens to basically kill him if he doesn't renounce his love for Michal. But the interesting thing is that he's not doing it like Eliab just to, protect the house of his father or to try to kind of prevent drama within the castle. But it's pretty clear that Joab is himself like personally attracted to Michal, and yeah, so he's actually seeing David as a potential rival for her affections. So yeah, what do you think about the decision to kind of create a little bit of a love triangle between David and Joab and Michal?
I think it's going to be interesting to see how that goes because we know Joab doesn't really get anywhere within that. Um, I just like this sequence with David and Joab just because it really this was the first time you really see the David that we think we're going to come to
Mm,
know, the person
yeah.
that's kind of putting himself entirely in God's hands and
Mm,
whatever you're going to do, Lord, basically do it.
yep.
It's like if I'm going to be dropped off the side of this cliff, then so be it.
Mm.
And that to me that feels like David. The first time we've truly gotten David in this show.
Yeah, it's really good like distillation of that, like the ideal of David, like David is kind of in his best moment, which is someone who's willing to kind of lay his life out before the Lord and just trust God to protect him and keep him safe in the face of like the threat of death, versus Joab, who is willing to use any means necessary to take what he wants, and is even willing to kill for that. To kind of see those two forces in opposition to each other, even though they're eventually going to be like allied to each other. That's a really interesting kind of moment for me. Um, but I am also interested in the idea of Joab being like infatuated with Michal, because we know that David's romance with Michal is eventually going to turn south, and even though they're going to remain married, Michal is going to be kind of within David's house, but they're not going to be like together anymore eventually, and so this kind of like sets the stage for there being kind of some future drama. I mean, that would be like probably like 3 seasons down the line or something, like quite a bit
Mm-hmm.
away from where we currently are. But I like that it seems like they're playing the long game and really thinking through like, oh yeah, we're gonna have this Joab character around for quite a while, so we need to give him some interesting desires yeah, that make him kind of an interesting force to pay attention to, because eventually as David gets older, we're going to see Joab kind of almost kind of taking power within like while still being underneath David. There's this moment where Joab kills one of David's commanders in order to kind of regain his position, and he's telling people like, whoever's for me and or whoever's for David and for Joab, follow me or whatever. So there's this real sense later in the books of Samuel that Joab is kind of this snake like force who, even though he kind of ostensibly is working for David, is also kind of working for himself. So I think there's a lot of interesting kind of stuff they could do with his character based on what they're kind of setting up for him right now. Yeah, so I'm really kind of interested in the Joab bit, even though like in this season he's not a huge character because yeah, we're just kind of getting set up. But it's interesting to. I even like that, you know um, his reaction to David. David, he doesn't like fight to get away, or he doesn't like somehow outsmart Joab, or it's not like someone comes in and interrupts. But Joab is like impressed by David when David kind of shows that degree of faith that he has, and that kind of like strikes him. And so it's also cool to see that even though Joab is very different from David, he does even at this moment kind of have that sense of respect for what makes David special. So I thought that was a cool moment in the episode.
Yeah, I think he's
Just a
got that
reminder.
same level of faith that allows him to accept David because
Mm,
he believes that he's not just in it for the power. He believes that I guess at this point Saul is still anointed, so he
mm,
will kind of transfer that allegiance to whoever the next anointed person is when he learns it and realizes it.
Mm. Yeah, that'll be an interesting moment when he finally like puts everything together. Yeah, I don't know if that'll be this season though, but we'll see. Yeah, and then the other daughter of Saul, Mirab, who's actually the older daughter of Saul. That's a dynamic where, yeah, when you're saying like, I'm not sure if this is like exactly how things would play out back in the time. The fact that like Mirab is like sees herself as like the underappreciated daughter, that wouldn't be like as common for the older daughter to be like the underappreciated one, but it's not like an entirely out of the like left field kind of thing. As I was thinking about it, yeah, there's something of kind of like with Genesis, and I'm thinking of like Jacob and Esau, where even though Esau was like technically the older one or whatever, Jacob was kind of favored by one of his parents and ended up like on top. And then even like yeah, like Jacob's wives, like the he gets married off to the older one because like technically that's like what you're supposed to do, but the younger one is the one that he really cares about or whatever. So I almost feel like they're kind of like trying to play a little bit on that, some of those tropes or like patterns
Hmm.
within the Bible, that yeah, sometimes the older one actually, even though like the standard kind of societal expectation is that the older one is going to be the favored one, it seems like in within the House of Saul at least, Michal is kind of the favored one because she's the more obedient one. So yeah, uh, Mirab as a character, I think has grown on me as we've kind of given her a little more complexity, and she's, you know, in the first episode she just kind of comes across as like haughty, self-centered person, whereas like in the past couple episodes we've gotten to like sit with her a little bit more, and yeah, I liked kind of there wasn't like a ton to like her romance with Jordan, Adriel's younger son, but it was enough where I was like, okay, like this is interesting, and then when she actually had her hopes for marriage dashed by Saul, yeah, that was a moving moment for me where like I felt a lot of pity for her. Yeah, what did you think about Mira?
Um, Good. She's. I think Jordan was a good match for her. Seems
Hmm.
like she's being presented as the smarter one of the two sisters,
Yeah, yeah.
whereas Michal is more of the empathetic or com-
Mm,
compassionate one. And I think they probably wanted to go even more with that distinction, but that even that becomes a little bit too stereotypical in these kind of stories. So I kind
yeah,
of
yeah.
like the level. I just kind of I kind of hope. I'm not sure where they're going to let her go as a
Mm,
character, but I'm interested to see what they do with it at this point.
yeah, me too. Um, yeah, there's a couple of things in the next couple episodes I can't talk about because so I've gotten to watch a couple ahead of time, but the embargo is still up, so I won't get into that right now. But yeah, I mean, I like how I like her relationship with Saul too, like kind of this sense that you know she thinks that he doesn't really care about her happiness, but then she has that moment where Saul is like, "Oh, I'm always thinking of your happiness," but then that totally gets undercut when what really matters to Saul at this moment is holding on to power, and he totally casts her happiness aside in order to um, you know yell at
Mm-hmm.
Adriel and try to protect his throne. So yeah,
Well, I
I
like
thought.
how they have how all the members of Saul's family, they all feel like they're part of the same family, even though they all have very distinct personalities. They do feel like they
Yeah,
all emanate from that same, uh, mother and father and the family dynamic. Even Jonathan
yeah, yeah, yeah.
ties into that.
And I like how they each have relationships with each other that are unique. Like initially in episode one of the season, they kind of set up these like opposing pairs of Mirab and McCall and Jonathan and Eshbal. But as the seasons progressed, we've got Mirab and Jonathan having nice little moments, and Mirab and Eshbal having moments, and McCall and some of Michal actually hasn't gotten as much time, I feel like with Jonathan or with Eshbal, but yeah, I like how we kind of see the cross dynamics within their family, and we get like a little bit of their humanity through that as we see like different people bring out the different aspects of us, and so I liked last episode how we saw Mirab and kind of her concern for her friend who was had slept with Eshbal and was kind of in threat of getting stoned or at least mistreated by her father and stuff. So yeah, I've liked to see kind of the complexity of these characters get drawn out through the different interactions that they're having with each other. Yeah. Okay, so that's it for characters. Any other kind of final things from this episode that you wanted to go
Just
into?
kind of only other comment I was going to make is, and I hope you can reassure me that my concern isn't going to be lasting
Mm,
too much longer. But Jonathan, I feel, has been sidelined a little bit too much the last
mm,
couple episodes. Because to me,
yeah,
that's one of the hearts of the whole David story. At least this segment of it is his friendship with Jonathan. That we haven't really gotten into that yet, but so I'm kind of really looking forward to it. I hope they get to that at some point pretty soon.
yeah. I think I can share this at least. So we finally get like because David and Jonathan they haven't really even met. I don't think that they really interact this episode at all. Maybe they like see each other. Um, they finally have like a brief interaction next episode. I won't say anything else about it. So we get a little bit of them interacting, and Jonathan in general. We do get more of him over the next couple episodes. I think it's not too much to share that. So we'll start to dig more into his character as the season goes along. But that's the challenge of a show like this, where you're juggling multiple storylines and characters and stuff like that. You saw this in like Rings of Power as well.
Mm-hmm.
The often like a season will have to like do a couple episodes of the character early on and kind of toss them up in the air, and then you're working with some of the other characters, get a couple episodes, toss them up in the air, take that character back, and toss them back up, and as things move along. So yeah, we definitely get more Jonathan as the season moves. But yeah, I know what you're saying. It would like I feel like this episode could have used just like a touch more of Jonathan, and you could have gotten that because it was this episode where there's lots of characters present and people are passing by each other. Even just like a few like brief interactions would have been nice. I agree with you there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
we could have had Jonathan. Like, I mean, has he been betrothed to anybody? I'm trying to remember. It's like, what was his marriage situation? I can't even
so
remember now that I think about it. Was he ever married to anybody?
so I can't remember which episode this is in. So if this is in one of the future episodes, I'm sorry, Amazon. I'm forgetting like where things are divvy up. I think it's in one of the previous episodes though. We get like a brief kind of allusion to the fact that Jonathan was married at some point. Uh, I think he has like this some sort of like strap, I think, from his marriage, and he has like a brief flashback, and then he kind of uh, puts that strap down. I think this is in like
Is that
maybe
Jonathan?
episode 3. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is with Jonathan. Um, so they've set up the fact that Jonathan was at some point married to someone, but for whatever reason, like we don't get a whole lot of detail, but presumably his wife died, and we haven't gotten very much more kind of about kind of that relationship. Um, yeah, but I think probably just kind of set that up to explain because definitely like historically speaking, you wouldn't have someone at Jonathan's age who isn't married yet because part of your whole like duty as the heir to the king is you're supposed to get married and have an heir and keep the bloodline going and whatever. I mean, in scripture, we're told that Jonathan has a son Ishbosheth, and there's like a kind of an interesting dynamic that happens with him and David, because Ishbosheth is crippled at early age, and David brings him into his court after David rises to power. So I definitely. Oh wait, did I say Ishbosheth? Mephibosheth. Sorry.
Yeah.
Similar. Both have the Sheth bit to it, but yeah, Mephibosheth gets brought into David's court after David rises to the kingship of Israel. So I definitely think they're gonna have to bring that in. So
Yeah.
they haven't established that Jonathan has a son, but it's the kind of thing where I could see them kind of like like somehow explaining that maybe Mephibosheth has been around all along, because maybe he's getting taken care of by a um, family members or a nurse or whatever, but they just didn't have enough time to
Hmm.
really get into that during this season. But yeah, I imagine that they'll have that Mephibosheth be the son of Jonathan's wife who died however long ago, or they'll somehow give him another romance.
Hmm.
But um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I can't believe I forgot Mephibosheth, because that's one of my favorite aspects of their friendship. Is what?
yeah,
Yeah, of course, he was his son. Of course, he's got a son, or he has to have a wife, because he has a very interesting son.
yeah, and kind of one of the beauties of kind of the vows that Jonathan and David take to each other is that they aren't just vowing friendship uh, of themselves, but they're saying like, I'll be a friend to all of your children, and our houses will be friends, in spite of how Saul has kind of made his house a enemy of David. Jonathan kind of promises that his house will accept David as a friend, and then David reciprocates eventually. Yeah, so that'll be interesting to see how they kind of explore that. Um, yeah, lots of interesting stuff for them
Hmm.
to set up. But I feel like that'll work well in like season two, as like um, David comes into the royal family not as like a servant, but as like a warrior, and then eventually they'll have to have it. He'll probably, I would guess that we'll have him get married to Michal probably within like the first few episodes of season two. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, we'll probably get like an episode where the whole like potential marriage to Mirab is set up, and then yeah, I don't know, but that's that's a ways down the road. Who knows
Yeah.
how long till we get season two. Although like season one, actually the production of it happened pretty quickly. I feel like it was only about a year ago that they announced like the actors and stuff like that, and said that they were gonna start shooting. So um, yeah. I guess one last thing from the when we were talking about David, we didn't really get into that scene on the throne towards the very end of the episode. And I
Hmm.
thought that was like a really cool scene. Like I like how we both got like David's respect for Saul as the anointed, which is something that comes up throughout Samuel. Like David is constantly refusing to raise his hand against Saul, because not just because he likes Saul as a friend or whatever, but because he sees Saul as God's anointed, and he has this kind of sense of reverence for him. So I like that we kind of set that up as David is kind of interacting with Saul directly, but then at the same time we got to see David's like, is he kind of also a little bit kind of coveting that power as he decides to sit on that throne when no one's watching. Yeah, I thought that was like an interesting like complexity to David that we haven't gotten this far. That he does have kind of some of those like personal ambitions, maybe that he doesn't let out most of the time, but when he's alone, can kind of appear. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of took it that this was that moment. It's like, Saul asks him, "Do you want to sit?" And he goes
Yep.
like, "No, it's only for the Lord's anointed."
Yep.
And then once he's in there, he's like, "Well, I do want to sit. I am the anointed,
Yep.
so it's okay." And then once you can almost see when he sits there, he just feels the surge of his destiny surging into him.
Yep.
That I think is
Which
going to
is
fuel a lot of
positive in
what's
some
going
ways,
on.
but then
Mhm.
like you can also see like how that could be a little problematic, that he is like kind of feeling that the pull of the power, which was so destructive to Saul and to his house. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, really, really interesting episode. And yeah, I kind of like that we got like a more kind of unified plot for the episode. With a show like this, you can't always do that. You sometimes have to have characters going in different directions, and you kind of unify things thematically or whatever. But it is nice when you have an episode like this where everything's happening in the same place, and you're just kind of getting different characters intersecting with each other, and yeah, having kind of a lot of interpersonal drama and stuff like that. Yeah, I'm all for episodes like this. So, but yeah, like I said, we'll be back next week. We'll be getting into episode 6. Some really interesting stuff that happens there. I'll give this hint that we're gonna get a lot more of kind of giant stuff and some of the lore there. So definitely interesting episode to keep your eyes out for. And I've already got my review for it written, and looking forward to yeah, just a few more episodes, and then we'll be hitting the end, and then Chosen season 5 in like less than 2 weeks, I think. So
Yeah.
yeah, we're in an amazing time. Lots of interesting biblical content out there. If you like the stuff that I do, the podcast, and especially the reviews and the blog and the Bible studies and stuff like that, and if you'd like to enable more of that stuff to happen, please support my work through my Buy Me a Coffee account. I think there's a link in the YouTube. And also, please also check out Victor's novel. Victor, do you want to share a little bit about him?
Just real quick, it's called The Sojourners. It's a Christian fantasy novel. I describe it as Narnia meets Game of Thrones meets the Acts of the Apostles. I'm currently publishing it a chapter at a time for free on my blog, bigdigital.substack.com. It's for free. A new episode comes out each Saturday morning. So it's on episode 22 coming out this weekend. So join in. I'd love to hear
Awesome.
anybody's comments.
Yeah, and it's a lot of fun. I've been reading along as well, and really enjoying it. So if you're into like Tolkien and Lewis and Martin and stuff like that, great Christian content, but also kind of engaging like world building and stuff like that. So hope you enjoy that as well. But that's it for tonight. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll be seeing you next week. Godspeed.